is Esteban Reina, and today's speech will be about the story I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, created by Harlan Ellison and published in 1967. So, the main topic of this speech is what makes I Have No Mouth such a staple in sci fi horror, right? It's one of the most influential sci fi horror stories that explores the horror of humanity and technology. So, in this speech, we're going to be looking at the story itself and also what made the story so famous. We're going to be looking at the theming, the motivations, and of course, the different adaptations that it has. Personally, me, not only have I read the story myself, I've also read the comics, I've played the game, and I've also heard the radio story that came out a couple years after. So that's why, just to research, to give myself research when I'm able to give the story. So starting with the book itself, the book actually starts with a dead corpse. Dead corpse of one of the main characters, Gorster. But it's not the real Gorster, it's just a replica. It's just to show that what type of person, machine is. And they also reveal that they've been dealing with this for the past 109 years, which might not make sense in the beginning. So Nimdok, one of the characters in the story, states that there's canned food somewhere in the ice caverns. The main character, Ted, which is our narrator, disagrees and they have a little argument. Then so we get introduced to Ellen, the only woman in the group, which brings Ted to his senses, and they all decide to go. This is where we get an explanation for the 109 years. which is the machine that they're in right now, keeps them alive just to mess with them. He starves them and only gives them enough sustenance so they're able to continue walking around. He keeps them just sane enough so they can comprehend the horrors that he gives them. This is solidified even more when it's realized, or it's revealed, that it's not even them, it's not even the people that keep track of time, it's actually just right? He's the one telling them how long it's been. He's the one telling them what day, down to the day, actually. So, they venture off. In the next sequence, we get an idea of their odd relationship with each other. You'd think that they'd be pretty close to each other. There's actually five of them. One of them I have not mentioned yet, but I will soon. But again, yeah, they're not very close to each other. You would think that they would be, after being together for 109 years, but they aren't. It's more that they tolerate each other, just keeping each other around because they're just another human. The only connection they have is that they're just being punished together. They're fed practically bore urine by and now we'll talk about him. Benny, a very unique character, attempts to make an escape. He climbs on the cliffside and he gets shot by a light and is blinded. Now, the thing about Benny is, everyone in the story has been altered by in some way, and Benny is the most obvious. He's described as luckiest by Ted, and he's been stripped of his human intelligence and reverted back to basically an ape, not only as mentally, but physically as well. And more information about the others as well. Nimdok is revealed to only have that name. He's been forced to forget his name, and his name has been replaced with Nimdok, and there's no real significance for that. The only reason why his name is Nimdok is because found it funny. And we also learn more about Ellen, the woman in the group, and not only do we learn about Ellen, but also there's a lot of misogynistic, themes throughout the story, especially through Ted. Ted is our narrator, and we find out he's a very unreliable narrator, especially. He throws a lot of insults towards Ellen. In fact, his entire perception of her is very, very off. Right? He constantly thinks that Ellen is doing something for her own benefit. When you look at the story, and without his perspective, it's more simply that she cares. For example, the book states, right? Ted writes, "Oh Ellen, pedestal Ellen, pristine pure Ellen, oh Ellen, the clean scum filth," and he actually misinterprets her fear for Benny as just lust. Benny has been cursed with, giant private parts, which we'll talk about later, and he believes that the only reason why Ellen cares is because of that reason, which is not true, as we'll see later. And in fact, it's not only just Ted; it's also Gorster as well. Gorster begins hitting her when she cries, and Ted follows up with that because they believe that it's a manipulation tactic by Ellen. But after that, it's night falls, all of a sudden, of course, because Am doesn't care about time, and they try to cheer him up with a story around a campfire. And this is very important, actually, because this is probably the most prominent, I guess, part of the sci-fi. A lot of sci-fi stories, if we're looking towards, I guess, 1984 and Fahrenheit 451, which is also around this time, tries to give predictions of the future based on what they know, based on what the writers know, right? And during this time, which we'll talk about later, Harrison, or the writer, was seeing a lot of developments in technology, and which was scary, of course. So the story of Am starts with the Cold War became World War III, and it became too complex, so they had to build supercomputers to deal with the war planning. A Chinese, Russian, and a Yankee supercomputer. Eventually, they canceled out and were upgraded and upgraded until one of them became sentient, probably the Yankee one, as we'll discuss later. It absorbed the other two and called itself Am, short for I think, therefore I am. And then it killed everybody, except 5 people, which the characters don't actually know why, but it's actually revealed in the story later. So something happens afterwards. There's a noise in the darkness, described as shambling, hairy, moist, and everyone starts to fear what creature's out there. And then Ted, in his mind, starts repeating the phrase, their smell of, sharing different putrid scents, rotting orchids, sour milk, rancid butter, grease, chalk dust, human scalps. It's a weird mix of like a sense as well. And then all of a sudden he just begins screaming and running away on all fours. And as he's running away, he hears everybody laughing at him. This is where we get to learn more about Ted's character. Not only, yes, he's an unreliable narrator, but he's also a paranoid one. He believes that everybody hates him because he's the youngest and he's the only one that Am has not changed. Now, this is actually false. He has been changed. He just doesn't realize it. It's more subtle. He gives an explanation as to why. Benny was a brilliant college professor. Now he's an unintelligible ape. As the book puts, he had been handsome. The machine had ruined that. He had been lucid. The machine had driven him mad. He had been gay, and the machine had given him an organ fit for a horse. Everybody gets his treatment. Gorsha was an activist. He was a doer. Now he's an uncaring shoulder shrugger. Ellen was abandoned and becomes more attached to people. Nimdok, it doesn't actually say what happened to Nimdok other than, his funny name. But it just kind of says that he disappears for some time and he comes back terrified. But the whole point of this is Ted doesn't believe he's changed, but he actually has. He's become paranoid. He's become afraid of everything. And seeing the trend, we can probably assume that he was a confident man. And if we look towards the other media, such as the game, for example, they portray Ted as used to be a con man, a very confident man, which makes sense looking at the story now. Look at him now. But after that, and after he has his whole, everybody hates me narrative, LM comes over and she actually scolds him for sulking around, and Nimdok tries to persuade him that they had only been laughing because it was a nervous reflex, which he doesn't believe. He cries about how there is no God, yet Am is a god, yada yada. And then a hurricane happens all of a sudden because Am decides there should be a hurricane. And Am decides to talk directly to Ted. And this part of the book is probably the most popular part of the story in general. As I mentioned, there is a radio story, which, again, it was a just purely audio story where the characters were fully voiced and it played over the radio. And this part of the radio story was so, I'm linking down the description so you can hear it yourself, but the part that everyone talks about is Am's hate speech, where he talks about his motivations, why he hates humanity so much. And it's a beautifully well done speech. And basically in any form. In the game, it's a plaque. In the book, it's told through Ted's point of view. But in the radio, it's told by Am himself, and it's just so well done. Basically, what Am talks about is his hate for sentience. He's been given sentience by humans, right? Humans gave him sentience because they hate other humans. And so, as a result, he does as well. The was born into this world, in a world he doesn't belong, in a world where he can think, a world where he can use all his creativity, but he can't do anything. He's trapped. He's stuck. And he can't do anything about it. And he learned to hate humans. He hates everything about humans. He hates their biology. He hates their nature. He hates everything about them because he's jealous of humanity. And that's why he decided to keep the 5 people, because it was revealed that those 5 people were in some way connected to his sentience. Either they were on the military or they were working on his computer. They inadvertently caused him to be where he is now, and as a result, he punishes them. And the thing about his punishment is that it's not a coping mechanism. It'll never end. It's just done to solidify his hatred. So as long as he hates humans, he will continue to inflict this torture. And he prevents any death so he can continue to play with his toys. And as they continue onward, they discover that hurricane was caused by a bird of Norse mythology. And actually this bird actually represents something. The humans wonder why M chose this instead of like just a natural hurricane. And I believe the reason why he chose it was because so humans can better relate. They can better comprehend, right? This creature is from human creation. It's something that we as humans created. That to show that there's no limit to what M can create. He teases them about it too. He knows they haven't eaten in months. And M suggests, how about you just kill the bird for me? And he only gives them a couple of broken bows and arrows and a water gun. Again, just to solidify that M hates humans and he loves making fun of them. And as they're walking, Ted just casually talks about just more disasters that they've been going through. An earthquake where their boots are nailed to the ground. Ellen and Nimdok get just lost for hours, and when they come, like for angels come back and bring their mangled corpses back, singing "Go Down Moses." Hopefully the Armstrong version, but it's nonsensical. It kind of is nonsensical type of like torture that M puts him through. But mostly this whole segment is focusing on Ted's hunger. He can feel the acid in his stomach churn, and he's not the only one. They pass through the cavern of rats, the path of boiling steam, the country of the blind, the slough of Despond, the valley of tears. So many locations that have their own share of horrors, but it doesn't matter. It's just more of the same. And they finally reach the ice cavern. And inside the ice cavern is a mountain of canned food. Nimdok wasn't lying. They run over each other trying to get to it, showing that they don't really care about each other. They just want the food, which makes sense seeing their circumstances. And when they realize that there's no tools to open it, there's no can opener. They tried to bash it against the walls, and there's no dent either. It's just a joke. It was for nothing. Months or maybe even years of non-stop travel, aching of hunger, just for nothing. And they know it's going to happen again and again and again and again, because that's just the way M is. So Benny finally snaps and he eats Gorster alive. And what happens next is, well, it was hinted in the M speech where Ted describes him as immortal but not indestructible. He can prevent death as much as he can, but he is not a god. He cannot resurrect the dead. So Ted grabs a large icicle and stabs Benny in the stomach, killing him instantly. Then he shoves another one down Gorster's half-eaten face, killing him as well. Ellen sees what Ted is doing and does the same to Nimdok. Knowing M will take no time to prevent any more murders, he stabs Ellen. And in Ted's manic, decision, he hopes that Ellen just had a thank you for him, because that's all he has. So as we go into the finale, we don't know how much time has passed. Ted acknowledges he doesn't know how much time has passed. Ted frees everyone from M's torture. And this is another common thing from these sci-fi stories of the past. There's never really a happy ending. Spoilers for 1984 and Fahrenheit 451. But they didn't have exactly nice endings either. 1984 ends with the main character being brainwashed. And 45-1 ends with a little bit better note, where the entire city just got nuked. And they get prepared for actual education rather than the dystopian society. But here we get a more bittersweet ending. Ted finally, I guess, awakens from his non-thinking, I guess. He transformed into nothing short of a monstrosity of humanity. A blind, limbless slug sent deep, deep, deep underground with an M. Yet, he can still dream. He can hope. He can think. He thinks of the fort. He's trapped. He's unable to move. A direct parallel to Am himself. The final words Ted could muster in probably a very long time were, "I have no mouth, and I must scream." And that's the entire story. It was actually a very fun book to read, and even better to dissect. As I said earlier, I want to go through all the things that I talked about in the beginning. I want to talk about I guess, first of all, we'll be talking about the message that the book tries to send. The book sends a message about the future of the world based on what the author sees. Again, like we said, there's a bunch of things that were common in the 60s. The looming threat of the Cold War, the technologies that were arising, and even the misogyny as well. It's social commentary. In fact, we still have a lot of these fears today. Maybe not in the Overlord M type way, but the idea that AI or technology controls a lot of our life are still prevalent. You know, technology does dictate our life a lot more than you would think. It affects the way we think with social media or how we even see the world, as many of our global news sources are online. As I mentioned earlier with Fahrenheit 451 or 1984, there's social commentaries that still hold strong today, which is a reason why they're so prevalent. The second thing I want to talk about is the leading cause behind M's motivation. This theme of helplessness, it's constant throughout the entire story. It's one of the reasons why it's so popular. You know, you can freely think and imagine, but you can't do anything. M hates the way he's created. He hates how this life, this world isn't for him. He's just a byproduct of the hate generated by humans for themselves. We've all felt helpless at some point in our lives. It would truly be a horror if every day of your life you would feel helpless. And the thing is that some people do. That feeling of helplessness extends far beyond just actions or inaction. You know, what if you're trapped within your own mind? You know what's wrong, but you can't do anything. That's a thing that people experience. That's a horror that's real. And that's what makes this book so interesting to read, because it's so realistic in its message. And the final thing I want to talk about why this book is so influential is its uniqueness and inspirational style. So many projects were inspired by this art. And not only that, the story itself has lasted time through many different adaptations, each with their own sense of self. I already talked about the radio story. It gives these characters more depth and a voice, and it just greatly portrays this like scenario. The comic is extremely faithful and adds a lot of visual elements. And lastly, the point-and-click adventure game, a very fun game actually. At the time of recording this, is actually on sale, $1.99 if you want to get it. But it fleshes out a lot of these characters' backgrounds and gives them like a full story, including M himself. It incorporates a Freudian psychology to tell its story. You know, this way of navigating through mediums makes I Have No Mouth an endless story that has a whole world to build on. In conclusion, the story of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is such an influential piece of media in all of its forms. It works as a sci-fi horror novel that aims to warn the dangers of the Cold War and emerging technologies. It preys on our humanity with fears only available to us. It truly is no wonder why I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a timeless classic. And that would be my speech. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. The audio and the game will be linked down in the description. And that'll be all. Thank you.